No matter who you are or where you are, you can have instant access to the Lord and grow from there. You don't have to jump through hoops first. As we emphasized before, of the forgiveness and the availability of salvation through Christ is immense. It's also quick, and the reason why he wants to forgive quickly is so that he can have instant access with us. He loves to walk with us and to help us to grow in our discipleship. So sometimes people get the feeling that if they have done wrong or they've knowingly done something against God, they feel far from God and think that somehow there needs to be a period of a cool down period, as it were, or some sort of religious rites you need to do in order to be back in a relationship with God. But Jesus teaches us quite clearly that when we turn to him, it's instant, that we get to come back to be with him and just continue on where we left off in the discipleship journey. No, that's not an invitation to go do wrong because you know he'll always accept us back. But it is something to inspire you if you ever feel like you're far from God, or maybe you don't feel as good as somebody else, or whatever, all those other stinking thinking things that get us to feel worse about ourselves than we should, is we need to go back to the Lord, and we can go there and we can do it now. Jesus is so good at forgiving people instantly and then bringing them into his discipleship fold that this is what the whole calling of Matthew is about. It is a really interesting one. We're going to be learning a lot about Matthew, who he was as a tax collector, what that meant when Jesus called him and said, "Follow me," and what it meant for the religious elite who were offended that Jesus ate with sinners and tax collectors. They were offended that Jesus accepted people in so easily without them going through some sort of purification rites, as it were. Why? It's because Jesus himself was the one who was sanctifying them and making them sacred. So, in fact, it was the Pharisees that would say that Jesus was eating with sinners and tax collectors. Jesus would say he was eating with his saints. And that's exactly what he calls you once you have reached out to him. The Lord calls upon us till salvation. We respond, and instantly our names are transformed into saints. And then we will follow him and be with him now and forevermore. So I want to encourage you that the world tries to get you down. The world tries to get you to think less of yourself and to realize that we on our own, we really aren't that much, but we are precious in God's sight. We are the apple of his eye. He likes to forgive. He loves to sanctify us, and he loves to include us immediately. We're in Matthew chapter 9, verse 9, as we move on through the book of Matthew on our series on discipleship, what it means to come to faith and what it means to follow Christ. And this is a big part of it. I also get to think, too, that this was a really big part for Matthew as well. This is the point where he's writing out his own conversion of coming to Christ. Now, remember, being a tax collector and from that area, Matthew would have known about Jesus for much of his ministry that we have read up to date. And maybe he watched other teachers of the law ask to follow Jesus and they reject. Maybe he saw these few fishermen that he was probably keen to watch because he could tax their fish, to see, like, why did Jesus choose these people? And he would have already likely understood Jesus to be peculiar in the way that he was going about things and not normative. And so it took some time maybe for Matthew to think about this. And then Jesus comes back from across the lake and he sees Matthew, and this is what happens next. As Jesus went on from there, he saw a man named Matthew sitting in the tax collector's booth. "Follow me," he told him, and Matthew got up and followed him. While Jesus was having dinner at Matthew's house, many tax collectors and sinners came and ate with him and his disciples. When the Pharisees saw this, they asked his disciples, "Why does your teacher eat with tax collectors and sinners?" On hearing this, Jesus said, "It is not the healthy that need a doctor, but the sick. And go and learn what this means. I desire mercy and not sacrifice. For I have not come to call the righteous, but sinners." So let's take the first point of this and just try to figure out who is Matthew and what does it mean to be a tax collector and why they're lumped into the broader group of sinners. Well, first of all, Matthew is a Hebrew name and it means the gift of God. So it's pretty cool that the gift of God is sitting there in the tax collector's booth. That might have infuriated maybe some more pious Pharisees who would see that someone calling themselves the gift of God is now taxing the people. Well, in much of the Roman world, tax collectors actually bid for the jobs, and the highest bidder would get the job over a jurisdiction to collect. And they would just charge an extra commission, to which they would have authority over even public, safety and society. They were a strong official in the ancient world. They were very protected, class two, from other centurions and whatnot. And so it made me often wonder of the centurion that we read about earlier, did he have any relation to Matthew and his protection? Who knows? The Roman government ran a well-oiled machine, and they did it on the backs of people's tax dollars. And so Matthew represented, especially with his commission, with this, you would have worked for, in Palestine, it wasn't quite as the highest bidder, but you worked as an official for, in this case, would be Herod Antipas. And Josephus would write that, in the equivalent of today's dollars, that the area of Galilee in the vicinity to which was Herod Antipas's jurisdiction, that the tax collectors, there would be many, would have gathered approximately $5 million from these people in 1 year. And that was kind of like their yearly budget for collection. And again, so Matthew is located in Capernaum, which is a trade route. The Via Maris goes by there, as well as you have the docks as the major fishing center for the Sea of Galilee. So it'd be a good place for all that commercial hub to be able to do the prescribed taxes that your bosses would give to you, and then add the commission on later that you would try to get for yourself. So the next thing is this. So there's a few things about tax collectors. Was one, they worked with the Romans, so they were seen as traitors. Two, they had frequent contact with Gentiles, so they were seen as unclean. Three, they extorted money from the people, so they were seen as thieves, basically. In a sense of, and four, they were trained in scribal ways, and they were a high official, which means they were also smart. And usually locals were chosen as tax collectors, so they knew the customs and they knew the language, and they would know whether or not they're being duped. If you might have been a tax collector from going to a different area, they might be able to do some tax evasion and you not notice it. But if you know all their customs and all their trickery, you know how to deal with them. And so by Matthew being a tax collector, that's why tax collectors were seen as like kind of like the worst people. You'd seem to be having no scruples. You'd have no family. You would have no acceptance in society at all. Also because you were a step above the regular sinner who just follows their lusts, or if you're a thief on hard times and you go and steal, that was seen as terrible, but still somewhat understandable. But to be intentionally going after riches, to go in collusion with the enemy, was just seen as so many intentional defilements that tax collectors really were a cut above the rest in a pious Jew's eyes. They would have just been absolutely aghast that a person would do something like that. So I wonder if even Matthew was surprised when Jesus came back by that way and said, "Hey, Matthew, follow me." And that is not in the sense of like, follow me to where I'm going next. It was very much the rabbi's call for a disciple. So it was understanding, you're going to be my disciple now. That might have been shocking to Matthew. Who knows? Maybe Matthew was having a change of heart over the months that leaded ahead of this, and that he was maybe wanting to leave that job, but thinking like, no, there's just too much I've done. I would never be accepted into God's kingdom after all that I've done. So he's still sitting in his tax collecting booth doing his job. Who knows? Maybe his heart was just super hard right up into that moment, and then it just melted when he heard the words of Jesus. What happened before that, we just simply don't know because it's not written. But it is interesting that when Matthew was called, he did answer and he followed. And he would have considered that an incredible privilege to be able to follow. And he was directly included. So Matthew, the other Gospels tell us a little bit more of the emotive details, the saying that he was overjoyed and called all his friends and everybody else that he knew. So this sinner who was saved by grace instantly and had access to Jesus went and told other people they could have the same. And so he threw a big banquet in Jesus' honor and invited everybody there. What is interesting is that for a rabbi to eat with people, the table manners that they had in the ancient world, particularly the Hebrews, were quite significant, and it meant a lot. There was no such thing as just going and grabbing a burger with somebody and ministering to them. To have a dinner, a formal dinner with somebody, you would have prior engagements and understandings of who would be where and who would sit where. This is why even as far back as Solomon would say, hey, when you're invited to a banquet, if you're not assigned a seat, don't take the seat of honor, lest somebody make you say, hey, no, you need to go sit over here because someone more distinguished came in. And Jesus picks up on that 1,000 years after Solomon and says the same thing. Don't try to take the best position for yourself, because this is all how the way those table manners worked back in those days. He said, take the humble position and then allow the hostess to elevate you in front of everybody if they see so fit. So in the same way, we learn from that is from those table manners, Jesus used that as a teaching tool. Don't try to make a name for yourself. You don't need to do anything to artificially make yourself better. Let the Lord lift you up in his due time. So take a humble approach and then God will elevate you. For God will elevate the humble and he will humble the exalted. And so according to local custom, by Jesus being the prime rabbi of the area, by this point he was like the name on the tip of everybody's tongue. that at that point, they would have said, he's condoning these people because they believed in a form of penance. They believed in a ranking of righteousness, that if Jesus was going to eat with somebody, there would have to be a ranking of do. And here's who's excluded from that meal. And it would have been all of these people. They would have had to have gone through months, if not years, of purification and trying to work your way up in social status to get the confidence of the people in order for you to take a seat of honor in any place. So the fact that Jesus just welcomed in sinners and tax collectors directly into supper was an incredible statement. And in fact, it does show that even the disciples bring word to Jesus. You know what the Pharisees are asking? They're saying, like, what? Why is he eating with sinners and tax collectors? Because at that moment, according to that custom, that would have looked like Jesus was condoning the actions of those people, but he absolutely was not. He was just quickly forgiving. It's funny how quickly forgiving, how grace can sometimes look like you're condoning something. It doesn't mean that at all. And we believe that grace is very powerful. We believe that grace is meant to change us. And so with this, Jesus needs to defend his ministry. He needs to defend his mission. Say, I've not come to call the righteous. Just as a healthy, don't need a doctor. I've come to call on the sinners and to bring them in. And so that is completely undermines their whole penance system, their whole righteousness system of obeying by the law and obeying only outwardly. See, because the Pharisees were really good at obeying the law on the outward. But Jesus saw their heart and said, you got it all, the act down right, but you don't actually have the heart of it all down right. And that's where I'm going to start, is the heart. I'll worry about the external later. Now, that doesn't mean that worrying about the external later means that Jesus doesn't worry about the external. He does want us to be righteous indeed as well, too. He just doesn't want us to do it in a legalistic way. So when it says, thou shalt not steal, he doesn't want you to just not take somebody's stuff. He wants you to think of the other person and, like, maybe, you know what, I should return this if I find something of somebody else's. How could I treat somebody else's property as good as I would want my property treated? So thinking of the heart of the matter, not just the law of the matter. So Jesus' way about going about this is going to undermine the entire world, let alone Galilee. So just a couple more interesting things to get you into the mind of a Galilean at that point in time. That during those meals that you would have, that would be official meals, and there was no real such thing as just going and grabbing a burger at McDonald's. Not because there wasn't fast food, but because those who were in the faith took even eating together as a pivotal moment in one's life and even in one's day. So there's no such thing as just a casual meal, especially for a rabbi. And in that, a rabbi would do many different ceremonies, which is what we've talked about before of why Jesus didn't wash his hands the way other people did. Is they would go through all these ceremonial things to become pure individually, so they could go to the table, and they would just simply see these people here have not been long enough in their ceremonial cleanliness in order to be able to be fit for that table. That they have to be on the outside of those types of things. But Jesus calls them to the inside, and he makes them clean from the inside. Jesus in there sanctifying, making them sacred on the inside, versus the Pharisees' understanding of taking it from the outside. And Jesus does flip their world upside down. He offends them, and he ends up flipping up the world. And here we are 2,000 years later, thousands of miles away, and we're still learning the ways of Christ and following him and understanding, you know what, we need to bring people in grace. And what's funny is that when we think of that we need to be willing to bring people into the grace of God, we often think of ourselves as being one of Jesus' already existing disciples, when we just might be one of those tax collectors and sinners that he's bringing in. And so this is why I believe that as a church, we're supposed to be very welcoming. Anybody who wants to come and learn and be a part, we call you in, and we don't care where you're at. Nobody's going to look down on you. We do not show favoritism. If you think you've been living a rough life lately and you're away from the Lord, you know what? Instant access. Come back to the Lord, and he will come back to you. And it is our job of those who currently believe is to make sure that we're doing right, to make sure that we're not being like a Pharisee, that, you know, we might look like we got it together on the outside, but do we really have God's heart in every matter? And if we do, we will want to instantly help people to join the fellowship and be an equal part of it right away. And so that's one thing that we do, is we put the invite out. If somebody invited me in one day, and I came and I listened and they welcomed me in, and so we do the same. And they've done that for 2,000 years, and we're going to continue to do it. So I welcome you to join me and this church on this walk as we continue to welcome people into the grace of God, to the forgiveness of sins, into the everlasting life. And if I could use a metaphor that would be apt in today's society, it would be to say that the church is the hospital or the ambulance. It's like an ambulance does not consider the state of the person when they find them. They just get them in the ambulance. Let's get them here and let's get them to the experts and get them cleaned up and on the way. Nobody says, "Oh no, don't get that. You might get dirt over there or blood on that or this or that." It's no, no. That's what it's made for. And I believe the church is made to be messy and to allow those who have been injured in this world, those who have been victims in this world, to be able to come in and to be welcomed in instantly without second thought, so that we can continue to follow Christ and get them back together with Him. Because you know what? If He is the source of life, why there's no separation, why there's no time required, is because Jesus is the time. Jesus is the sanctifier. He is the one that does the fixing. You don't fix yourself and then bring yourself to Jesus. You let Him do it, and He loves to do it instantly. And that's the thing I love about it the most, is that it is instant. He doesn't forsake us even for a minute. He welcomes us straight back in, which is often makes me wonder how Matthew felt. Remember, Matthew is inspired by the Holy Spirit to write this book of discipleship and to explain that Jesus is the coming King. But he's also one of the characters in it. And he's also writing part of his own story. So when he's writing, when after he hears Jesus talk about the parable of the prodigal son, the one who had it all and forewent it all so that he could just go do whatever he wanted. And then he came back and was welcomed back by the Father instantly. And it made the brother angry because the brother's like, "Hey, I've been doing right the whole time. What about me?" And the father was just happy to have the son back and welcomed him in instantly. I wonder when Matthew, he's writing that down for our benefit. But I'm wondering how he felt that day that he was writing that, or the day that he heard Jesus say that, and think, "I can't believe my God has welcomed me," because Matthew most surely would have identified himself as a prodigal son, having been a traitor from before. And I just sometimes I try to get into the head of the writers of the Bible. Yes, I know this is superintended by the Holy Spirit, but it's still not devoid of the man and his experience, of the grace that he experienced when Jesus said to him that day, "Follow me." I wonder if he would have been shocked to think, like, I can be a rabbi's disciple without doing some sort of penance, without spending 2 years in a commune in the desert where I could learn and ask for forgiveness and whip myself with chains until I'd be worthy enough to go in. It's like, no, it's not time that makes you worthy. It's Jesus that makes you worthy. So you got to get to Him instantly. And Matthew hammers this down. And I'm going to be bringing this up each time through the rest of this book of Matthew. Matthew does it a lot. You're going to be really surprised, and it might jump out at you to realize how many times Jesus talks about instant grace and how much Matthew emphasizes that. Why? Because Matthew experienced it himself. Matthew would have been a pivotal, and certainly was a pivotal disciple. You know, there's other guys that might have been somewhat illiterate at that point in their life, but Matthew was a brilliant man. He had to have been. I mean, tax collectors well known for being not only just smart, but crafty. And so then now Jesus using this man's craftiness to be able to understand the Old and the New Testament as it's now coming together. Matthew, being a Jew, would have understood the customs. He would have understood, even though he had rejected at that point, now he's seeing it come to light. As Jesus is teaching, you've heard it said that this, that, and the other thing. Well, I tell you this. And Matthew would have known that you've heard it said, because Jesus is implying that everybody's already heard it and understands it. Matthew, being a Jew, obviously was one of those. And when he hears it in the new light, he's like, "That's what Moses meant? That's what God's heart was in all of that?" Because I need to write this down so everybody else could know about it. And we praise the Lord that he did. That Matthew was potentially, if I can give another example, a kid that grew up in the church, learned all the Bible stories, but never really saw the grace of God amongst the people, and then just decided to go do his own thing. And then later would come and find the heart of Christ and come back and be a powerhouse for the Lord. And maybe if you're watching and you're not connected to us here, and maybe you have a bad experience in the church, maybe you don't have one at all, we invite you to come in and meet the real Jesus. A lot of people have heard his name, but there's a lot of misconceptions out there about the heart and intention of our God. And I encourage you to come on in, to get connected with him, to have instant forgiveness of sins by just simply accepting and receiving grace from him. That we trust that he has died on the cross and that he has saved us. So we trust in our salvation based upon what he did on the cross. And then we follow him. Because that's immediately what he says to, is the whole part of salvation is follow me. And it's like, okay, I'm going to follow you now. If you have that declaration, that's how easy it is to be saved. The discipleship part's a little bit harder because we've got to walk it out. But you know what? Jesus teaches us more than how to help people be discipled. Today, on this day, we mark on our calendar as Father's Day. And as a father, one of the things that is generally seen as the more masculine of the parental traits is to help a child to become mature and wise and ready to live in a world that is often nasty. The feminine, the mother side, usually is focused on the nurturing. You need both of those. You need to be well nurtured. You need to be loved. You need to know that you always have someone in your corner. But you also need someone who knows how to kick you out of the nest. Someone had to help you to be able to handle the world that you're about to go into. You're not going to be in mom and dad's house forever. You're going to go be on your own. And many of us learn that the hard way. We spurn our parents' teaching as we're teenagers. We move out on our own, and whammo, the world hits us like a brick wall. But discipleship is basically spiritual parenting. It is to help us so that when you make the next spiritual milestones, you'll be able to make those with ease because you've been well trained ahead of time by people who have gone before you. And the same way as we learn from business masters, if you're going into business, you learn from people who've been there and done that. They give you as many scenarios they have run into so that when you get there, you'll recognize where you are and that you're not blindsided. The same thing goes in the medical field for doctors, old doctors teaching young doctors on how to have wisdom earlier than they did. And because that's another thing with parenting is that we always want to see the children go further than we did. If I can just give my kids more wisdom than what I had at the time period to which I got it, I think they'd do better. And so this is what we aim to do as a church, as we're fixing the misconceptions of Christ and teaching people how to have faith, how to have the right heart of faith, that as we align ourselves with Christ, as we follow him, how can we raise up a generation of faith that is excellent in their understanding of Scripture? And as they go out and apply it to the world, the rest of the world be like, how do you go about life? And who taught you how to live like this? And you have so much peace in your life, and you don't seem to be alarmed by much of anything, and you're ready for just about anything that happens to you, and you're nice to people along the way. And well, then that's an opportunity for us to say, well, I've been trained by my church, and I'm very thankful for them. And I'm very thankful that these disciples, the ones who are called, especially this Matthew, who he's now our master. Jesus taught him, Matthew's teaching us, and now here we are teaching each other. And as we go through this world, let us become excellent followers of Christ. And let us understand that the purpose of parenting, and whether you're a spiritual father or whether you're an actual father, let us get together to make sure that those who come after us, whether they're young in their faith and young in life, or old in life and young in the faith, to help people to recognize the wisdom of Christ, to help them to understand his precepts, and most importantly, to know that he loves you and that he wants to do something great with you. And I hope this helps you as we move on our discipleship journey. I hope you realize the heart of God in all of this and that he wants us to be more than just believers. He wants us to be followers. And he wants us to follow him until we're ready to take the baton ourselves. So that's kind of how our education system goes, is you go and you learn some of the book smarts. We say that you come to church, you go to Bible studies. And then you're apprenticed. You start taking on a ministry with somebody who helps you to lead, and then you're doing ministry in this world. And then who knows? Many pastors have been born and created right out of the church, from going the teaching, from the apprenticing, and then from them now leading. We've even grown up with some of our own leaders here in our church from the beginning to the end. And we're always looking for more leaders because we know God is always wanting to produce disciples along that. So where would you say you are in your discipleship journey? Would you say that you are still a child of the faith where there's some misconceptions you still need to sort out with the Lord? That you need to come to the Lord and get at the table and learn his word? Well, we all need to learn the word a little bit more, so that applies to all of us. But is there a point now where, I think I've got enough education that I could jump into apprentice mode? That as a carpenter going through school now goes and works with a carpenter, yeah, I could work with somebody in ministry to see God in action. And that's an important thing. If we just do Bible studies, you might get book smart, but you're not probably going to see God a lot in action. God is at work to this very day, Jesus said. So if we want to see God in our daily lives, we should expect to be doing ministry to help see God in action while we're doing his will. We don't often encounter God while laying on the couch because that's not doing anything, and our God is busy. And so I want to encourage you to get involved in ministry. It is not only what we're called to do, it is the great blessing that you're going to see God in action. I can't tell you the testimonies of people who their minds are blown about their relationship with God once they take that step from being learners into doers. And then as you continue to do, we'll see what God is going to raise you up to be a leader, maybe starting off as a ministry. Jesus said, he who is faithful with little will be given much, which means he's looking to promote people. And you know what? We need more leaders in this church, more elders, more deacons. and more churches around the world need to. Another thing I find interesting is particularly in the West, years ago stats would say churches are in decline. What are all these pastors going to do when all these churches close down because they can't afford it anymore? It's like, well, guess what? Half of all pastors in North America are over 55. It's pastors are going to end up retiring before churches end up closing down. There's not going to be enough leaders even for the dwindling churches that are in North America. God is going to need to raise up lots of leaders to handle not only what is currently here, but any revival that God has still in store for us. But also take courage that God can flip it around just like that and give revival in our land, as there is revival around the world. Christianity is the fastest growing religion. It is the biggest religion, and it is the one where people are free to make their choice, whatever country they're in. It is their number one choice, where they're free and not under compulsion when it comes to their faith. That our faith is strong, our faith is real, because our Christ did come for us in very humble circumstances. And he was elevated by us to a cross, but by God to heaven. And he sent his Holy Spirit to guide us so that we too may be lifted up in due time, and that we may too be a part of his kingdom if we continue in discipleship. So let's work on this together and see what God can do with us in the days and months and years ahead. God bless you. Thank you for turning into church today. Have a great day.
Let's do something together. Life is better in community. So let me encourage you to reach out to us via the Connect card that you'll see in the description at the bottom of this video. That's your opportunity to just say hi. Let us know you're watching. Let us know how we can be praying for you. Or maybe you have some questions about faith, about our church, or about life in general. We're here to help you, and we're happy to do so. I'd also like to thank those who are faithfully giving. I can't express my thanks enough. We're able to continue ministry in our community and abroad so wonderfully because of your faithfulness of giving the Lord's tithes and your offerings. So to go above and beyond his tithes is just incredible. And so for those of you who want to come and visit us, please know that our service is a gift to you. We never ask for anything from our guests. As a Christian, it is my act of worship to give to the Lord. And each one of us Christians believe that. So if you want to come check us out, there's no pressure. Just come on over. If you did want to give, we have simple ways. Give at regalchurch.com for your e-transfer, no password required. You can drop it in the offering plate on Sundays, or you can drop to the office through the week. Just pop in, say hello, and let us know who you are, and we'd be happy to chat with you. We can also set up automatic deposit. We'll just send you the simple form, and you fill it out and send it back, and it's good to go. So thanks for your time, and God bless you. Thank you.